It's interesting because we're almost at one of these Davos moments where you don't see very often, where the forces come together. Geneva two stocks stumbled there with Iran being invited and then pulled back again. But the fact that Rouhani and his foreign minister are going to be engaging with the business community, do you find it for real that this could lead to a breakthrough in your view?
I think it's relatively early days, John, to be very honest. I mean, Iran once upon a time was producing 6 million barrels of oil per day. Today, Iraq and Iran together are producing less than 6. And you know, as you said, with gas reserves, it has the second largest gas reserves in the world today after Russia, but it's still a net gas importer. So I think it'll be some time before you see Iran and Iraq having a major impact on the export markets, and that in turn having an effect on energy markets on the whole.
Okay, let's look at the best case scenario. Say this relationship moves forward here, the engagement with the United States, the 6-month window improves, sanctions are eased. How long would it take for Iran to go from 2.5 million barrels of production to say 4.5, where it was before the sanctions, and then back up to that 1970 level of 6 million barrels a day?
Yeah. Well, sanctions is one of the issues. Of course, Iran also is hindered by its constitutional mandate, which basically doesn't allow companies to operate there unless it's under a buyback agreement, which of course is not attractive to most majors today. So there's quite a few reforms that the country would have to do to properly incentivize companies to come and spend the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars that are required to get that production up. The same, of course, applies with Iraq, despite the fact that Iraq could potentially rival Saudi Arabia as the largest oil producer in the world. Today, with the security concerns, with of course no cohesive policy when it comes to either on the legal or the financial, the commercial aspects, it's very difficult to see it making headway anytime soon.
It's a very important question, but is the region ready for Iran to be engaged with the West? Saudi Arabia doesn't like the concept. Iraq and Iran actually fought for a decade and no victor there. Could the region handle this sort of engagement with Iran rising with its power?
Well, it's interesting you say that. What's interesting in the region today is that you have a situation where a lot of the conventional oil producers face a common threat, and that's with unconventional oil and tight oil. In the last 3 years alone, the U.S. has increased its production by 3 million barrels of oil per day. That'll only increase. The second challenge the region has, which Saudi Arabia and Iran shares as well, is that of major subsidies, which is a burden on the governments and the economies. And the third is with respect to energy inefficiency. A latest IEA report demonstrates that the Gulf region alone consumes more energy than all of Africa put together.
Yeah, it's one of the big secrets that nobody really talks about very
exactly.
often.
So what's interesting is they share certain common complexities, certain common challenges, and again, common enemies, like I said, with respect to non-conventional oil. So there's nothing better than a common enemy to try and encourage closer cooperation. And I think OPEC, and in particular the Gulf region with Iran and Iraq, need to coordinate their strategy to have a cohesive policy to counter these potential threats in the near future.
More sensitive question here. If the U.S. becomes energy independent with the shale oil and gas coming on so strong, 6 million barrels is going to be added by 2018 between Canada and the United States. Quite significant. They don't want to be the global policeman in the Straits of Hormuz. Yeah. Who takes over? Who fills that void, in your view?
Well, it's an interesting situation because, as you said, the U.S. will become a lot more confident being independent, let's say, from an energy perspective. Whether it chooses, as a result of that, to have less of a say or of a role on the global landscape, or indeed whether it chooses to remain more involved, depends on U.S. politics. Something, though, that is a bit more subtle, a subtle consequence to the shale phenomenon, which people aren't really talking about, is the potential for oil for gas to substitute oil in the transport sector.
Yeah, and it's a big revolution.
Absolutely. I mean, today, 60% of all global oil demand is consumed by the transport sector. Yeah. And today, with technology, with CNG as well as with LNG, it does exist. The only issues are with the networks. But if the networks are there and they come in the next few years, and China's investing a lot of money there, you could see another major market lost for oil. So there, you know, it'll be a fairly
changing landscape. Very quickly, and the last question to you here. Behind the scenes, because you work in the region, you're a Iraqi background, live in the UAE. Do people say, you know, Badr, what's really going to happen with Iran here? I mean, what's your bet in the next 12 months? What happens with Iran? Can this relationship that's coming into the West stay on track?
Well, look, I don't think anybody disputes, anybody in the region, in the GCC, as it were, disputes that Iran is an important neighbor. Apart from the fact that it's 80 million in population, it's a big economy, about half the size of Saudi's economy, about $500 billion, and the trade volumes with the GCC prior to the sanctions and some of the tensions was pretty healthy, 30 to $40 billion a year. That's of course slumped. So I think if that comes online again, and I guess that's a big if. It will definitely boost certain economies in the GCC, in particular the UAE and Oman. But again, as we said, it's relatively early days.
So you're not that confident, to be candid. A subtle way of saying it. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.